Clara Dawson had spent most of her life believing fate had forgotten her. She was the quiet daughter of a seamstress, invisible in a crowded boarding house, the girl who mended hems for ladies who never learned her name. So when a mail-order marriage agreement arrived, her one chance to escape the gray life she'd always known, she gripped the opportunity with trembling hands. She memorized every line of the letter from her supposed husband-to-be. I offer a respectable home, steady work, and the promise you will never go hungry here. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a lifeline, and so she boarded the train west. Days later, dust-covered and bone-tired, Clara stepped off the final wagon, expecting to see the stern-faced widower described in his letter. Instead, she found herself facing a ranch she did not recognize. The place was bigger, quieter, and more weathered than she imagined. The fields stretched endlessly, like waves of gold rolling beneath a wide Montana sky. A windmill creaked lazily in the breeze. The mountains in the distance looked like sleeping giants whose breath shaped the valley. Clara's heart stumbled in her chest. This did not look like the homestead she had pictured through months of sleepless nights. A wiry wagon driver swung her luggage down with a grunt. "Harlan Ranch," he announced, dusting his hands. "End of the line for you." Clara blinked hard. "Harlan? Sir, I think there's been a mistake. I meant to go to," but the man was already clambering back onto his seat, uninterested in anything more than finishing his route before the sun dropped behind the hills. "Take it up with the rancher, miss," he said. Then, with a flick of the reins, he rolled away, leaving Clara standing in a swirl of dust that tasted faintly of panic. She looked around again, gripping her carpetbag so tightly that her knuckles whitened. The ranch house stood tall but lonely, its wooden porch worn from years of footsteps that were no longer there. A barn leaned slightly to one side, as though bowing under the weight of secrets. No one was outside to greet her. The silence pressed against her ears, heavier than the traveling trunk at her feet. What if he doesn't want me? What if no one here knows who I am? The thought cut through her like a cold blade. She'd traveled hundreds of miles for a man she'd never met, praying he might offer her a place to belong. But now she wasn't even sure she was standing on the right land. Still, Clara had never been one to collapse under fear. So she smoothed the wrinkles from her dress, squared her shoulders, and started up the long path toward the house. Step by step, breath by breath. Before she could reach the porch, the door creaked open. A small figure stepped out no taller than her waist, wearing patched boots and a braid that swayed like a rope in the breeze. A little girl. She studied Clara with wide, curious eyes, as though trying to place her in a memory she didn't yet have. Clara opened her mouth to ask for directions, to explain the mistake, to apologize for intruding, but the girl beat her to it. She took one cautious step forward, then another, then whispered, barely loud enough to carry on the wind, "Are you the lady God finally sent to us?" Clara's breath caught. She suddenly understood. Whether this ranch was the wrong one or not, her life had just changed forever. The moment Clara heard the little girl's whisper, something inside her softened like a frostbitten branch finally feeling the sun's warmth. But before Clara could gather her thoughts, another voice sounded from the doorway, deep and edged with caution. "Annie," the man said, "get back inside." Clara lifted her eyes and saw him. Luke Harlan stood framed in the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall, with dark hair in need of a trim and the weary look of a man who carried grief like a second skin. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, revealing the kind of strength built from years of labor, not vanity. His eyes, gray as a brewing storm, fixed on Clara with guarded confusion. Clara felt her breath hitch. This was definitely not the man who had written her the letter. That man had described himself as clean-cut, strict, and precise. Luke Harland was something entirely different, rough-hewn, rugged, and unmistakably haunted. But before he could ask, Annie tugged at her father's shirt and whispered loudly, "Papa, I told you." I prayed, and God finally sent her. Luke's jaw clenched. "Annie, enough," he murmured, his tone soft but strained. Clara swallowed. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The driver left me here by accident. I was supposed to be delivered to—" Luke raised a hand, stopping her gently. "You'd better come inside. Storm's moving and fast." And he was right. The wind had begun to push harder, swirling bits of dry grass across the yard. Dark clouds rolled over the mountain tops. Like a tide coming in too quickly. Clara hesitated only a moment before nodding. Inside the Harland ranch house, the air smelled faintly of pine soap and something warm simmering on the stove. The house was tidy but quiet, too quiet. Clara noticed details instinctively: a man's coat hanging alone on the hook, a rocking chair with a knitted blanket draped over it, a mantel lined with dust except for one clean circle where a photograph once must have sat. This was a home that had once been full, and wasn't anymore. A woman appeared from the kitchen, her gray hair pinned neatly beneath a lace cap. Her eyes, kind but worn, widened slightly when she saw Clara. "Luke? Who is this young lady?" "I'm Clara Dawson," Clara answered. "And I believe I've arrived at the wrong ranch." The older woman introduced herself, Martha Harland, Luke's mother. She offered Clara a seat and a cup of warm tea, her hands gentle, practiced, steady. Clara felt comforted instantly. Luke remained standing, arms crossed, leaning against the doorway as though unsure how close he should allow himself to be. Clara took her tea gratefully. "I meant to marry a man named Roy Cartwell," she explained softly. I don't know how the driver confused the ranch names." At the mention of that name, Luke exhaled sharply, a sound darker than a sigh. "Cartwell," he muttered. "That explains the mess." Martha shot her son a look, but Clara pretended not to notice. Across the table, Annie perched on her chair like a sparrow, eyes fixed on Clara with a strange mix of fascination and certainty. "Papa, she's supposed to be here," she said firmly, as though stating a universal fact. Luke's gaze flicked toward his daughter, torn, pained. He knelt beside her, touching her cheek with a tenderness that cracked Clara's heart open. "Annie," he murmured, "you know Mama isn't coming back." Annie's little hands fisted. "I know," she whispered, "but God can still send someone." Luke closed his eyes, just for a breath. A breath full of ache. Clara looked away, sensing she was witnessing something sacred. This family, still healing, still hurting, still hoping, and she realized something quietly devastating. Even though this ranch wasn't her intended destination, fate had brought her to a place where every soul inside desperately needed something she might be able to give: warmth, help, comfort, or maybe, in time, something like love. The wind rattled the windows as if insisting that Clara remain exactly where she was. Warmth from the stove drifted into the small dining room, but Clara's nerves stayed tight, coiled like a thread pulled too hard. She sat with her teacup between both hands, hoping the heat would steady her trembling fingers. Luke Harland didn't sit. He stood near the doorway, watchful, wary, and impossibly tall, like a man prepared to chase away danger, but unsure whether she was it. Clara couldn't blame him. A stranger and a bride meant for another man had landed on his doorstep without warning. Still, she could feel his eyes on her, studying her with the same careful intensity a rancher used when Azba, examining a horse for hidden injuries or a storm cloud for signs of turning. Dangerous, But Clara wasn't the only one being examined. Annie hadn't stopped staring at her since she stepped through the door. The child sat across from Clara, elbows on the table and chin cradled in small palms, her gaze bright and unblinking. Not hostile. Not suspicious. Hopeful. As if Clara were a storybook character who might disappear if she looked away. Trying to break the tension, Clara offered her a small smile. You have a lovely home. Annie didn't smile back. She simply nodded, solemn as a preacher, then asked, Do you like horses? Clara blinked. Very much, and chickens? I suppose so. Annie leaned closer. Can you sew? I mean, better than Grandma? Martha's soft laugh rang from the kitchen. I'll pretend I didn't hear that, child. Clara felt her lips tug upward despite her anxiety. I can mend just about anything. Annie seemed satisfied, as though checking items off a mysterious list. Then she pointed suddenly at Clara's face. Your eyes look like Mama's. Luke stiffened. Clara's smile faded instantly, her heart squeezing with a sharp, unexpected pain. She hadn't meant to cause hurt, especially not to a child already carrying so much. Annie. Luke warned quietly, but the little girl wasn't done. She slid from her chair, padded around the table, and stopped right in front of Clara. Her small hand reached out hesitant, trembling, but determined, and rested on Clara's arm. Papa says Mama is in heaven, she whispered. So God had to send someone else to take care of us. Clara's breath caught. Sweetheart, I'm not sure I'm the person you think. Yes, you are, Annie insisted, her tiny voice fierce with faith. I prayed for you. Clara's throat tightened. Of all the people in this strange land, all the roads, all the wagons, how had she ended up here? Why this house? Why this little girl? Luke stepped forward, jaw tight, torn between correcting his daughter and protecting her fragile hope. Annie, he said gently, Miss Dawson isn't staying. She's supposed to be at a different ranch. Yes, I know, Annie interrupted with a wave of her hand, as if such details didn't matter in the grand scheme of God's plans. But the driver brought her here. That means she's supposed to be here. Kids had a way of believing things with their whole hearts. Clara envied that she couldn't remember the last time she'd believed in anything that strongly. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and approached the table, her voice low and kind. Annie, honey, let the lady breathe. Annie reluctantly stepped back, but her eyes never left Clara's face. Luke finally spoke, directing his words to Clara, though something in his voice softened. I'll ride out at first light and send word to Cartwell. He'll send someone to fetch you. Clara nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She didn't know why the thought unsettled her so much. Maybe it was Annie's unwavering faith. Maybe it was the storm brewing outside. Maybe it was the way Luke kept glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Or maybe it was the strange, quiet truth echoing inside her. Something about this place felt like fate. For the first time in her life, Clara wondered if a mistake might not be a mistake at all. By the time Clara finished her tea, the storm Luke had predicted was no longer a distant threat. It was rolling across the plains with a fury that seemed aimed directly at the Harland Ranch. The wind howled against the windows, rattling the shutters like a giant knocking with impatient fists. Thunder cracked overhead, startling Clara so hard she nearly sloshed her tea. Luke moved instantly, checking the locks, shutting the curtains, securing the front door with a firm shove of his shoulder. He moved like a man who'd done this 1,000 times, preparing his home to withstand whatever the world threw at it, weather or otherwise. It's going to be a rough one, he muttered. Martha stepped beside him, peering out at the dark sky. No traveler should be out in that. Clara sank deeper into her chair, a wave of helplessness washing over her. She'd spent her last coins on the journey. She had no friends in this territory, no familiar name to call on, No shelter except this one. But the driver, he said he would return for me in the morning, Clara murmured. Luke shook his head. He'll be lucky if he makes it back to town before the creek rises. No one's riding tonight. Clara's heart thudded against her ribs. She didn't want to be a burden, especially not to a family already carrying so much sorrow. But what choice did she have? Step into the storm and freeze? Wander the valley and get lost? She had nowhere to go except the very place she hadn't been meant to arrive at. Luke must have seen the doubt in her eyes, because his voice softened just a little. You'll stay here for the night. It's safer. In the morning, we'll figure out the rest. Martha touched Clara's shoulder warmly. There's a spare room at the end of the hall. It's small, but it'll keep you dry. Clara nodded, gratefulness and guilt tangling inside her chest. Thank you, truly. Annie, sitting cross-legged on the rug, looked up with a triumphant little grin, as if this were proof of everything she'd been saying. See, Papa? She has to stay. God brought her before the storm. Luke rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling through his nose. Annie. But Annie wasn't listening. She crawled over to Clara and tugged at her skirt with gentle determination. Do you want to see my room? I can show you the doll Papa made me. The offer was innocent, pure, exactly what Clara needed to feel like she belonged somewhere, even if only for a few hours. I'd love that, Clara said softly. Annie beamed and tugged her toward the hallway, talking nonstop about her dolls, the barn cats, and the new calf born just last week. Clara listened with a warm ache in her chest, her footsteps echoing faintly through the wooden hall. But Luke's footsteps echoed too. He followed at a distance, not in suspicion but in responsibility, making sure Clara didn't slip on the floor or get overwhelmed by Annie's enthusiasm. Clara felt his presence behind them, like a shadow both protective and conflicted. When Annie darted ahead to fetch her doll, Clara paused near a lamp, looking back at Luke. I'm sorry for arriving uninvited, she said softly. I never meant to cause trouble. Luke leaned against the wall, arms folded, but not harshly this time. More like he was holding himself together. You didn't cause the storm. You didn't ask the driver to be careless. You're here. That's all. But it seems difficult for you. He hesitated, long enough that the storm's rumble filled the silence. Everything's difficult these days, he admitted quietly. Losing my wife, raising Annie alone, making sure this ranch survives winter. His gaze softened. A stray traveler is the least of my worries. Clara felt something shift in understanding. He wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He was wounded, and maybe, without meaning to, she had stepped into the very center of that wound. Annie came running back with a wooden doll clutched to her chest, giggling. Come on, Miss Clara. Clara smiled and followed the little girl into her room. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, Clara felt for the first time in years that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The storm raged through the night, but inside the Harland home, something far gentler began to stir. After Annie proudly showed Clara her wooden doll carved with clumsy love by a grieving father, she insisted on giving Clara a full tour of her small world, her drawings pinned crookedly on the wall, her tiny trunk of treasures, the window where she watched the horses every morning. Clara listened to every word, nodding, asking questions, letting Annie's bubbling energy sweep her along like a river after spring thaw. The little girl's joy was contagious, and Clara found herself laughing softly at stories that were, in truth, quite ordinary yet told with a wonder only a child could muster. When Martha finally ushered Annie toward bed, Annie clung to Clara's hand with surprising strength. "Will you tuck me in?" she asked. Clara blinked. "Me?" "Yes." Annie nodded as if this were obvious. Martha raised an eyebrow at Luke, who hovered near the doorway, arms crossed, pretending he wasn't affected by any of this. Clara glanced at him too, worried he might think she was overstepping. Luke sighed, rubbing his forehead. "If Miss Dawson doesn't mind." Clara shook her head gently. "I don't mind at all." So she followed Annie into her room, pulling the thin quilt up to the child's chin. The rain pounded against the roof, but inside the small room it felt peaceful. "Miss Clara?" Annie whispered sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart?" "If you stay, can you help me feed the chicks in the morning?" Clara's heart trembled. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." Annie's eyes fluttered shut, but she managed one last whisper before sleep claimed her. "I told Papa. God always sends the right ones when we're lonely." Clara held her breath, throat tightening as she brushed a stray curl from Annie's forehead. When she stepped out into the hallway, Luke was there, leaning against the wall. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, storm gray and weary, watched her with something softer than suspicion. Something like gratitude, or fear of wanting something again. "Thank you," he said in a low voice. "She's a wonderful child," Clara replied. "She's all I have left." His voice cracked, just barely, like thin ice under weight. Clara hesitated before saying, "She loves you very much." Luke nodded but didn't speak. He seemed at war with himself. She wondered what he'd been like before grief had carved him hollow, before loneliness set in like winter frost. Martha called from the kitchen, "Luke, help me close the shutters on the back windows." He pushed off the wall. "Try to rest, Miss Dawson. You've had a long journey." Clara nodded and made her way toward the guest room. But instead of sleep, she found herself ironing out the blankets, wiping dust from the dresser, tidying the space by habit trained by years of serving others. By the time she sat on the bed, the room looked warmer, lived in. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha peeked in. "I thought you might want a nightgown to borrow. Annie's old ones won't do, but I kept one of my daughter-in-law's. If that's not too strange." Clara touched the garment reverently. "Thank you." Martha stepped inside, her eyes gentle but sharp with the wisdom of a woman who had seen much and missed even more. "This house hasn't had much laughter since we buried my daughter-in-law. You brought some tonight." Clara swallowed hard. "It wasn't me. Annie just needed someone to talk to." Martha smiled softly. "Child, don't you know? Sometimes God doesn't send miracles. He sends people." Clara felt a tremor run through her chest. When Martha left, Clara lay down in the borrowed nightgown, listening to the storm soften into a steady rain. The house creaked like an old soul settling under the weight of memory. She closed her eyes, but a single thought kept her awake. Maybe she hadn't arrived at the wrong ranch after all. The storm lingered into morning, leaving the world outside wrapped in a hushed gray stillness. Clara awoke to the faint smell of coffee drifting through the hallway, mingled with the earthy scent of wet soil. She dressed quietly in the borrowed nightgown and her travel-worn dress, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could. The room felt strangely familiar, as though it had been waiting for her longer than a single night. When she stepped into the kitchen, Martha greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, dear. Sit. You must be hungry." Clara murmured thanks and sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap. She glanced out the window. The yard was soaked, puddles glimmering like silver pools. The wagon driver would not be coming for her any time soon. A knot tightened in her stomach. Annie was already at the table, swinging her legs and grinning at Clara as if she were a beloved aunt who'd lived with them all her life. Luke stood near the stove, pouring coffee, his presence filling the room even without a word. He handed Clara a cup. "Morning." "Good morning," Clara said softly, meeting his gaze just long enough to feel the weight of his unspoken thoughts. Breakfast was quiet at first, just the clinking of cutlery and the soft crackle of the stove. Clara sensed tension humming beneath the surface, a tension she didn't want to cause but seemed to have become tangled in when Annie ran off to fetch her boots after finishing her meal. Luke finally spoke. "Miss Dawson," he began, resting his hands on the back of a chair, "I know this situation isn't comfortable for you, but until the driver returns or Cartwell sends word, you'll have to stay here. The road's washed out." "I understand," Clara said. "I don't want to inconvenience you." Luke shook his head. "You aren't. Annie hasn't taken to anyone in a long time." Martha cleared her throat meaningfully, giving Luke a look. "Why don't you tell the poor girl why?" Luke stiffened. "Ma, she deserves to know," Martha insisted gently. "If she's to stay here a while, she should understand the atmosphere she's walking into." Clara's heart skipped. "I'm sorry. Did I do something wrong?" Martha reached across the table, placing a comforting hand over Clara's. "Not at all. But this home has known loss and it's shaped us." Luke exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. "My wife Annie's mother died 2 winters ago. Pneumonia took her fast." "Too fast." Clara's breath hitched. The ache in Luke's voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was raw honesty, stripped of pride. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. She was gentle, Luke continued, his voice lower. "Right, the kind of woman who made this place feel alive. Annie adored her." "I did too." He paused, the silence stretching like a thin thread that might snap. "When she passed, I didn't know how to be a father on my own. Annie cried for weeks, then months. Some days she still wakes up calling for her." Clara's eyes stung. Martha added softly, "Annie prays every night for God to send someone to help their hearts feel whole again. She doesn't understand the difference between a helper and a mother. To her, kindness means family." Clara swallowed hard, understanding dawning painfully. "And my arrival felt like an answer to her prayers." Luke met her eyes, and for the first time, his guarded expression cracked. "She's pinning her hopes on you," he said quietly, "and I'm trying to keep her from being hurt again." Clara clasped her hands tightly. "I would never hurt her." "I know," Luke said. "That's what worries me." Clara froze. "Worries you?" He nodded. "Because she already attached herself to you in one night. That kind of trust. It's dangerous if you're leaving soon." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say because a part of her wished she could stay, if only to bring peace to the little girl who'd clung to her with such innocent faith. But she also carried secrets of her own, and one of them slipped out before she could stop it. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," she murmured. "Back east?" "My life wasn't safe. Marriage was my only chance at a different future." The storm finally drifted east, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under a pale morning sun. But inside the Harland Ranch, the air felt strangely charged, heavy with the truth spoken the night before and the one still lingering unspoken. Clara stepped outside to help Martha hang damp laundry on the line, grateful for the fresh air. The earth was soft under her boots, and the scent of rain mingled with sagebrush. Annie darted around her like a playful pup, pointing out birds, puddles, and the stubborn rooster that refused to stay in the coop. Luke watched from the porch, arms crossed, trying and failing not to look at Clara too often. The day moved slowly. Gently. Clara helped Martha knead bread, her sleeves rolled up and her hair pinned back. She swept the floors, mended a torn sleeve of Annie's dress, and gathered eggs from the henhouse. She didn't mean to slip into the rhythm of the household, but something about it felt natural, like muscle memory for a life she'd never lived. Miss Clara. Annie squealed midday. Papa says we can show you the horses. Clara glanced toward Luke, who stood by the corral, holding the reins of a Palomino mare with a white blaze. The sunlight caught his features, strong jaw, steady hands, eyes softer than she'd seen before. He gave a small nod. If you're comfortable around horses. Clara smiled. I grew up around carriage teams. I'm no stranger. Luke handed her the reins, watching how her fingers curled with gentle confidence. She's a good mare, calm. She won't give you trouble. Clara stroked the horse's neck, feeling warmth beneath the glossy coat. She's beautiful. Annie grinned up at her. Papa says Mama used to ride her. Clara's hand stilled. Luke's expression flickered pain, memory, pride. She loved this horse, he admitted. Spent half her mornings out here. Clara lowered her gaze. I'm sure she was a remarkable woman. She was. His voice carried both love and loss. But you don't need to tiptoe around her memory. Annie talks about her every day. As if on cue, Annie climbed onto the fence rail. Papa said Mama would like you, she said, swinging her legs. Because you smile soft. Not loud. Clara blinked. Soft? Like you're thinking of someone else while you smile, Annie explained matter-of-factly. Mama smiled like that. Papa says you can see kindness in quiet people. Luke shot his daughter a half-amused, half-embarrassed look. Annie. But Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest. Compliments meant more from a child than from any adult. They held no flattery, only truth. As the day wore on, Clara and Luke found themselves falling into small conversations, at first practical, then slowly more personal. They talked about the land, about Annie's mischievous streak, about chores, about the winter ahead. Luke was cautious, measuring his words like a man who'd been punished for speaking too freely in the past. But Clara listened with real interest, and somehow that loosened his guard. When she asked about his horses, his voice changed, alive, passionate, as if she'd unlocked a door he hadn't opened since his wife died. You know, he said, leaning against the fence, you're the first person in a long time who didn't treat me like a widower first and a man second. Clara's heart skipped. I don't know how to treat you as anything except who you are, she said softly. Luke looked at her, really looked, eyes lingering for a moment too long, and Clara felt the weight of that gaze. Like a touch. Later in the afternoon, Martha sent her and Luke to gather fallen branches from a storm near the creek. The walk was quiet but comfortable, boots sinking into damp earth. Clara bent to pick up a branch when her foot slipped on the muddy bank. Luke reached out instinctively, catching her by the arm. His grip was firm, steady, warm. Their eyes met close, enough for Clara to see the gold flecks in his storm-gray irises, for a heartbeat. Neither spoke. Then Luke cleared his throat, letting go. Careful. The ground slick? Clara nodded, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. Thank you. They walked on, but something had changed. It was small, barely visible, but real. A bond had taken root quietly, steadily, like a seed buried in the soil after rain. And though neither of them would admit it yet, the ranch didn't feel like the wrong place anymore. The morning Clara had been dreading, though she never voiced it aloud, arrived with the crunch of wagon wheels on the frozen dirt road leading up to the Harland Ranch. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that made every sound travel farther than it should. Annie was inside helping Luke's mother knead dough, humming a tune Clara had taught her. Luke was out checking the fence line. Clara was sweeping the porch when she heard it, the rhythmic creak of leather, the stomp of hooves, and then a clipped, angry voice shouting her name. She froze. The rancher who appeared at the gate was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a curled mustache and a look in his eye that made Clara's stomach tighten. Redmond Tate, the man she was supposed to marry. The man whose ranch she was intended for had she not been mistakenly delivered into Luke Harlan's world instead, Clara Dawson. Tate barked, throwing the reins down and stomping toward her. "What in blazes do you think you're doing here? I paid for you. You were supposed to be at my ranch a week ago." His words were harsh, and the chill in his tone made Clara step back. Not out of fear, at least not entirely, but out of instinct, as though protecting the fragile peace she'd found here. Luke's ranch had become more than shelter. It had become familiar, safe, a place where she felt seen. Tate's arrival felt like a door slamming shut on all that warmth. Luke's mother stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands. "Sir, you'll watch your tone on this property." But Tate ignored her, glaring directly at Clara as if she were cattle that had strayed onto the wrong range. "You're coming with me," he snapped. "I paid the agency, I fixed the house, and I expect what's mine." Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to speak, she needed to, but her mouth had gone dry. Tate's presence dredged up every fear she had left behind in the East. Men who didn't ask. Men who demanded. Men who believed a woman's life was a thing to purchase. Before she could find her voice, Luke came striding up the path from the barn, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. His eyes flicked from Clara to Tate, quickly reading the situation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply placed himself between Clara and Tate in a quiet, unshakable way that said he would not move unless forced. "You're upsetting my family," Luke said evenly. "Your family?" Tate scoffed. "This woman belongs to me. She's under contract." Clara flinched at that word belongs. Luke noticed. His expression hardened in a way she'd never seen before. "No woman belongs to any man," Luke replied. "Least of all one who looks terrified the moment you open your mouth." Tate stepped forward, fist balling as if preparing to assert himself physically. But Luke didn't budge. His calm only seemed to irritate Tate further. "I'll have the law on you," Tate hissed. "Harboring my bride. She's not your bride," Luke cut in. "She's a free woman who deserves to choose where she wants to be." Clara felt a tremor run through her, not from fear now, but from something like hope. Someone was standing for her. Not speaking over her, not dragging her, not demanding obedience. Just standing there, refusing to let her be treated as property. Inside the house, Annie peeked through the window, her little face pale. She whispered, "Mama Clara?" As though afraid this rough stranger had come to steal her, new mother away, Tate pointed a rigid finger at Clara. "Pack your things. We leave now." Luke turned slightly, eyes meeting Clara's. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was an invitation to choose. And for the first time in her life, Clara realized she had one. The tension on the porch was thick enough to cut with a knife. Redmond Tate's harsh words had fallen like stones in the quiet Harlan yard, while Luke stood unwavering between Clara and the man she had been sent to marry. Annie's small figure peeked nervously from the window, her hands pressed against the glass as if willing her tiny prayers to reach Clara's heart. Clara's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that she should comply, that she should leave with Tate and finally fulfill the contract she had signed months ago. But her heart, so long starved of warmth, kindness, and safety, felt itself shift. Every smile from Annie, every gentle glance from Luke, every small kindness that had been extended to her in the past few days weighed heavier than the promises she had made to a stranger. She drew a shaky breath, straightened her shoulders, and finally spoke. "Mr. Tate, I cannot go with you. Not now. Not ever." Tate's face darkened. "You dare refuse me? I've paid for you. You have no choice." Luke's hand moved subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if to protect her even without speaking. "She always had a choice," he said firmly, "and now she's making it." The cold wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant pine. Tate's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, but Clara didn't flinch this time. She realized with a mix of fear and courage that the terror she had carried for so long could no longer dictate her life. I never wanted to marry you," Clara said, her voice growing steadier with every word. "I agreed because I had nowhere else to go, nowhere to hide. But I found something here, someone who sees me for who I am, someone I care for, and a family I want to protect." Her eyes met Luke's, and she felt her heart thrum like it would burst from relief and anticipation. "I choose to stay here." Tate's fists clenched, his face red with anger. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." Luke stepped slightly closer, his presence a shield. "I don't think so. This woman knows what's right for her." Clara's attention shifted toward the house, where Annie's little face was pressed against the window pane. The child's wide eyes sparkled with hope and trust. "Don't take her away, Papa," she whispered. Annie's plea sent a fresh wave of determination through Clara. She dropped her gaze to meet the little girl's. And the world outside, the angry, entitled man. The harsh winter wind faded in significance. All that mattered was the choice she had made, to embrace a life of warmth, love, and belonging. Tate, realizing that his threats carried no weight, spat angrily on the ground. "This isn't over," he muttered, turning his horse with a final glare. "You'll regret defying me." Clara didn't respond. Instead, she held her head high, her heart finally light. She watched Tate disappear over the ridge, leaving a silence that was almost sacred. Luke exhaled deeply, finally letting his shoulders relax. He turned to her, his eyes soft but searching. "Are you certain?" Clara nodded. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Luke's lips curved into a rare, slow smile, and he reached for her hand. The gesture was gentle but filled with promise. "Then you're welcome here. You're safe now. And so is Annie." Annie burst from the house, running straight into Clara's arms, giggling with relief. "I knew it. God sent you to us," she exclaimed, hugging her tightly. Clara hugged her back, feeling the weight of loneliness that had haunted her entire life begin to lift. Looking up, she saw Luke watching them, a mixture of awe, relief, and something deeper shining in his eyes. In that moment, the wrong ranch, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became her home. And the people she had been sent to care for became her family. Clara's heart, once guarded and cautious, now opened fully, ready for the life she had chosen, a life built on love, trust, and the quiet certainty that some mistakes are only God's way of leading us to exactly where we are meant to be. The sun dipped low over the Montana horizon, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber. The storm from days before had passed, leaving the world washed clean and fragrant with the smell of wet earth and pine. Clara stood on the porch, watching Annie chase a calf across the yard, her laughter ringing like music through the crisp evening air. Luke was nearby, reins in hand, adjusting the saddle on the Palomino mare. The quiet hum of the ranch, so ordinary, so steady, felt like the heartbeat of a life Clara had never known she was missing. Annie ran toward Clara, cheeks flushed, curls bouncing in the fading sunlight. "Miss Clara," she shouted. "Come see. Papa says we're going to make a new garden this fall." Clara knelt to meet her gaze. "I'd love to help," she said, smiling warmly. Her heart swelled with a fullness she had never imagined. She had come to the West seeking safety and escape. Yet what she found was far richer: connection, trust, and the quiet, unspoken promise of love. Luke walked up to them, boots crunching on the gravel, and rested a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. His eyes, storm gray yet warm, met hers. There was no pretense here, no obligation, only the raw honesty of two hearts learning to beat in rhythm. "You've brought life back into this place," he said quietly, almost as if afraid to break the spell of peace. "Not just for Annie, but for all of us." Clara's hand lingered under his. She could feel the steadiness of him, the strength built from years of toil, grief, and survival. "And you've shown me what a family can truly be," she whispered. "Somewhere to belong. Someone to belong to." Annie ran between them, arms outstretched. "Now we're a real family," she exclaimed. "God finally sent you to us, just like I prayed." Luke knelt to gather her in his arms, spinning her lightly before she landed with a soft thud on the ground. "Yes, you're right," he said, smiling for the first time in days without any shadow of grief. "We're a family." Clara watched the bond between father and daughter, feeling the warmth of it seep into her own chest. She realized in that quiet golden hour that this home, this ranch, and these people were exactly where she was meant to be. The mistakes, the storms, the wrong turns, they had all led her here, to a place that felt like it had been waiting for her all along. Later, as twilight deepened into a canopy of stars, Luke led Clara to the porch swing. They sat together, hands entwined, hearts finally unguarded. Around them, the ranch settled into the night, quiet but alive with possibility. Clara leaned her head against Luke's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, the steady rhythm of a man who had finally allowed himself to hope again. "I never imagined I could feel this," Clara began, voice soft but certain. "You don't have to imagine it anymore," Luke replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "It's real. We made it real, together." Annie's sleepy voice called from inside. "Good night, Miss Clara." "Good night, Papa." Clara smiled, her heart brimming. She stood and looked out over the ranch, the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. The wrong ranch had become the right one. The unexpected home had become her sanctuary. And the little girl whose faith never wavered had brought them all together, bridging loneliness with love. Clara turned back to Luke, her voice a whisper. "Thank you for letting me stay, for letting me belong." Luke smiled, a quiet, steadfast smile that carried the weight of grief, hope, and newfound joy. "You belong here, always." And as Annie's soft breathing filled the house and the stars twinkled above, Clara realized she had finally found a home. Not just a roof over her head, not just shelter from the storms, but a life filled with love, trust, and family, the family she had always prayed for. Even if she didn't know a dot in that moment, the ranch, the little girl, and the man who had once seemed so unapproachable became her world. And for the first time in her life, Clara Dawson felt truly, irrevocably, and happily at home. The wrong ranch had been a miracle in disguise. The family meant to be had finally found one another.